Welcome back to StartZone Inside Tech podcast. Today's discussion is all about the EV industry and its impact on our energy grid. Joining us here is Kedar Balasubramanian, a product manager from the company gridX, and also a true enthusiast when it comes to energy and technology. Welcome to StartZone, Kedar.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please let us know more about yourself.
Yep, sure. Kedar Balasubramanian, an energy engineer by education, and really, like you mentioned, a true fan of the energy transition. Have been working in the energy field in Europe for the last couple of years, and I had a quick short stint in India as well before that. And I primarily work on the demand side, so basically close to the consumer level on the home energy management space currently.
Yeah, welcome on my behalf also. And yeah, at gridX, where you work, I'm familiar with it through a lot of interesting industry insights you guys publish, but maybe you could tell us a little bit of what gridX does exactly.
Absolutely. So gridX GmbH, we're a German-based energy management service provider with a clear vision of making 100% clean energy affordable and reliable for everybody. So we've been in this space, started off in Germany about 6 to 7 years ago, and been in the home energy space primarily, but also expanded a bit towards EV charging, so charging point operators and fleet charging, and now expanding to other regional markets in Europe. So quite active in the space for the last couple of years in the HEMS as well as the EV space.
What does your products actually, like what are they doing, solving the issue, or what are they doing actually, your products?
So we do know that I think European grids and European homes themselves are pushing more and more towards this concept known as electrification, which is basically trying to take up all of our conventional energy assets and then substituting them with electricity devices, right? So devices that run. So for example, an electric vehicle instead of the conventional ICE vehicle, or a heat pump as opposed to the conventional gas boiler. The thing is, when you switch towards electrification, it is on one side super good from a sustainability standpoint because you're reducing the emissions produced by the devices themselves. But on the other side, it is then putting a huge load on this mega machine that we operate called the electricity grid. And so such a mega machine, the more the load you put on it, the more unstable it becomes. And so it needs some sort of regulation, or it needs some sort of regulator. This is basically done using on the farthest end, on the consumer side, using these smart algorithms. So what we do as gridX is basically write these algorithms, which then are then introduced into your homes by an IoT device. And then these algorithms, basically what they do is they optimize the energy flows between your house. So if you've got a PV, you've got an electric vehicle, you've got a heat pump, you basically want to make sure that your electricity that is produced by your PV is used as much as possible for your home devices, so that you're promoting the energy transition. And so that's exactly what we do by using these algorithms.
Yeah, that's what I became familiar when I was getting home charging station. I don't have solar panels in the picture yet, at least, but yeah, there was a lot of warnings that it might be because it's a heavy load to the home grid already that I might face challenges. But luckily, my house has a very strong fuses. Let's say that I don't need any load management at the moment. But if I would have solar panels, it would change the picture a lot. So yeah, this kind of energy management is getting very relevant nowadays when the energy demand is increasing through the electric vehicles, for example. Also, the people are getting solar panels, home energy storages, and soon vehicles can give the power also to the house. And some of them already can. And also in a big picture, when we think the power grid, I think many countries are currently looking very carefully into the power grid situation because it changes the behavior and how the energy is consumed and the loads quite significantly.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And maybe just a quick background on that power grid, especially, the European grid is quite special, in the sense that it is a completely synchronous grid covering 20 to 25 European countries. I think at one point it was even one of the largest synchronous grids in the world. And it has to, and it's special is because it has to maintain this frequency in which electricity is delivered right from the generators to the end users, right? That's 50 hertz. And it has to supply this reliably. So the reliability standard for the European grid is quite large, quite amazing. I think it's somewhere around 99.99% reliability standard that has to be maintained, which means less than 2 to 3 hours of blackouts or brownouts are allowed in your homes by law. So supplying this electricity reliably to about 450 million European citizens is quite the feat, and this is really, really difficult to manage as more and more of these distributed energy devices get into the grid, right? So you've got the PV, you've got the rooftop solar, basically the electric vehicles, heat pumps, all of these devices, the batteries, they are electrical devices that put more and more load the more you install them, both on the utility level as well as on the demand side, on the household level. And I think the latest figures show that somewhere between now and 2030, you're going to have an increase in about 50 to 60% of these devices, which means millions of these devices coming online. And this isn't just specific to the European grid, but most of our grids are quite old, right? So built in the 1940s, 50s, or even older, in a desperate need to be refurbished, maintained, retrofitted, and so the primary need of the energy transition right now is to basically put in investments into resurrecting this grid and then reinforcing them to handle these millions of devices coming online.
It's an interesting challenge for the grid. Like at the same time, there's a lot of these small sources affecting, and also the renewable energies bringing on challenge to the grid at the same time. So interesting challenge for those who are taking care of the grid remains as reliable as it is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that is the ambition as well from the regulators, right? So you've got this parent regulator in the EU level. It's called the ACER, and then they are responsible for then setting down the guidelines as to, okay, this is what's going to happen for the next 5 to 10 years. And then they hand this over to the transmission system operators, who then also have their own organization, really, really popularly known as the ENTSO-E. All of them then come together to basically put their expertise into maintaining, operating, and then also expanding the grid over the European Union, accelerating these projects that have to be, where green energy has to be brought on a rapid scale, plan for this in the long term, and also basically support all of these distribution and transmission and distribution level networks that then run all the way from the generation plants to the end user's home.
I think I had some insights on how is the power demand actually increasing.
I agree that grid capacity and resilience are now front and center. We're not just talking about keeping the lights on here. It's also about ensuring that the infrastructure can handle the additional load from so many EVs plugging in at the same time. The rise in EV numbers is, of course, leading to a rise in electricity demand. By 2030, the grid should be able to handle 60% more in electricity demand. And as Kedar mentioned previously also, that the infrastructure in Europe, most of them are very old. So there's a plan to invest around 500 billion to renew that infrastructure and to make some new ones. So we can make sure that the grid can handle this 60% more of electricity demand by 2030.
Let's go more towards the kind of the household area where you guys operate in the houses and locations, not so much on the grid level. And what are you seeing like the biggest challenges? Like you guys are working there a lot. There is now the vehicle to grid is coming, energy storage, small energy storages are entering to the areas. What do you see the biggest challenges there at the moment?
Great question. I think the biggest challenge to us as an energy management provider is the fact that we need to provide an energy management system that is low cost but also high value, right? I think that's the ultimate dream for any provider out there, minimizing on costs but then maximizing on value. And the way we do that is basically try to provide a system that can connect to as wide a variety of asset class as possible. All of the different EVs, the EV charging stations, the batteries, the heat pumps, they are all super diverse, and then we want to have a system that connects to all of them, a white label solution. We can then communicate with all of them and then optimize all of these energy flows between the devices themselves, because a house owner, what he wants ultimately is basically to pay as less as possible on his electricity bill. That's cost savings is basically the primary focus for any homeowner out there, you, me, and Rika included. And so one of the biggest challenges we see is basically integrating the system as more and more assets emerge with more and more technologies and more communication protocols out there. I think I wouldn't say the biggest challenge, but the biggest focus out there right now is basically, like I mentioned earlier, funding. Bringing in the incentives to then enable this purchase and buying of these energy assets. Also, on the other hand, regulation, which then has to be enforced, which I think Europe is doing a good job at already. And also, more importantly, from the EU perspective, having this sort of de-escalating this dependency that not just Europe, but the entire world has on China in terms of the sheer knowledge and technology skills that they possess. So that would be a major challenge, not just for us as an energy management provider, but for all of the European and American energy firms out there.
Yeah, that must be actually, I can see that there could be a challenge. Like I'm thinking, like, let's say that we want to manage the energy in the house, and for example, the heat pump in my house, I was studying it. I was planning to have it kind of controlled a bit better, that it could reduce the heating, for example, in certain situations, and when the certain spot market price or whatever, or the whole load in the house is too high. But I found out that my heat pump doesn't actually really have an interface for any system to communicate with it. So are you guys working then with different manufacturers kind of to establish that there is the interfaces in the devices that they can be controlled from outside systems?
Yes, absolutely. And then the heat pump really is an exciting asset class that you just spoke about today. I think most of us think it's going to be the asset of the decade because it is such a huge contributor to reducing the emissions of a building. I think the single largest contributor to a building emission is the heating system itself. And so you're absolutely right in the sense that talking to so many different assets means having touch points with a lot of different original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs as they're called, because each one of them have their own individual interface, have their own requirements, have their own constraints, and having a solution that then provides this abstraction layer between these different assets and the energy management logic itself is quite the complicated task. But yes, that is exactly what we work on one end.
Yeah, that is, like electric vehicles, they are already built and designed to communicate with external platforms, at least in most of them. But then the heat pumps are older generation of technology, which were not required yet to communicate so much with the external systems.
Absolutely, yes. And this is where I think EVs have made quite a bit of progress, because of having these underlying protocols and these communication methods. Like I think one of the most famous one is the OCPP, Open Charge Point Protocol, which is basically then acting as this abstraction layer, like I mentioned. And also the EEBus or EEBus, as it is called, I think, which basically promotes the standardizing of this language spoken between different energy assets, and also the larger transmission system operators, right? So basically having one common unified language where data can be sent from one end to the other, and commands can be sent from one end to the other.
Yeah, and then like in energy management, something which is kind of raising, I've seen like a lot of topics, and I also got like offer for this kind of home battery energy storage solution. How do you see them actually? Do you think they will get more popular? On myself, when I was making a calculation of the offer I got, I couldn't make it financially reasonable, but I believe the prices are going down and they probably start getting more common.
Mm-hmm. And great question once again. I wouldn't want to comment too much on the pricing because I'm not a pricing expert myself.
Yeah.
But
I do understand. Yeah.
Simply speaking, on the pure logic itself, there is no way that a battery is not going to become more in demand with the escalation of the installations of PV systems, right? Because fundamentally speaking, with especially with decentralized energy generation like solar, the time when energy is produced and the time when the energy is consumed are totally different, because you produce during the daytime and you consume during the nighttime, which means that you're not going to have instantaneous production and consumption. So you're not going to meet supply and demand, basically. And so you're going to have a buffer which then stores this electricity when it's produced and then discharges it when it's consumed, when it's needed to be consumed. And that's what the battery fulfills, right? And it is only going to get more in demand as more PV systems are installed because of simple supply and demand. And that is also another reason why EVs themselves are becoming more popular in their dual usage of charging and discharging their battery, V2G, V2H, V2X, basically, as more and more EVs are sold.
Yeah, we have discussed this in the other episodes also, and what I'm a little bit skeptic on, like the EVs as kind of balancing, is two aspects. Is that, like you say, that let's say you have solar panels and the most of the energy is produced or all of it is during the daytime, and most you need in the night when it gets cooler and so on. But on the other hand, you need the car to be fully charged probably in the morning when you are leaving the house to work and so on. And the other thing, what I see is that, do the people really want to use these recharge cycles of their car battery for balancing? Because it will cut down the lifetime, and nobody actually has reliable statistics yet how different type of batteries, new type of batteries will last that.
Great question once again, and that is, I think, where also an energy management system like what gridX is developing comes into play. Because what we're talking about here is, I think, one step before. I think the most popular phrase used is called smart charging. The aim of smart charging is not only to maximize the benefit to the user, but also to the grid, right? So you're going to have the car dynamically adjusting the way it charges as on the basis of different indicators. One of them being, like you said, the homeowner says, hey, I want to go to the office at 8 a.m., which means I need to have a car with X percentage of charge. How do we know that? We just ask, okay, what's the range that you expect to drive on a certain day or on an average day? And then we basically adjust the way the car is charged overnight, for example. Nowadays, what is also happening is you're also having these external factors. For example, the grid operator says that, hey, I'm going to charge you lesser if you charge during a specific period of time, which means that the energy management system also has to take into account the tariffs, the prices that come in, and say, okay, to make the most benefit for my homeowner, I charge when it's cheap, when there's cheap electricity being provided by the grid. And of course, there's the other one where, when there's a grid congestion that's happening, then I do not charge. Also, when I do notice that there is too much electrical consumption happening, I also do not want to blow my fuse. So I think this sort of dynamic smart charging depends on a lot of internal as well as external indicators. And that is what is going to basically be incorporated by the energy management system when it takes a decision, because you're absolutely right. Ultimately, we do not want to degrade the lifetime of the EV battery. But I think this is being considered as a top priority whenever we use such energy management decisions for the homeowners.
Yeah, Yeah, that is true. Like the like power grid companies who operate there to produce the power and sell it. Like in Finland, it's increasingly more popular to pay per spot price. So market price per hour changing. So same day your electricity, it's 1 hour can cost 3 cents per kilowatt hour, but and then later in the same day you pay 45 cents per kilowatt hour. So definitely kind of all the energy management systems are probably getting very welcome. And it's easier to justify the cost when the prices are fluctuating that much.
True, absolutely. And it is only once you do this successfully, once you have this process optimized and honed, that when you can even think about the next step, which is then what you talk about is bi-directional charging, right? Which is then not only charging from the grid, but also supporting the grid when you want, or when you need to, when there is a lack of supply and increase in demand, for example. And that is where then you also need to have the second part of this entire V2G concept, which is then scale, because you cannot have 100, or even 1,000 cars that are enough for such kinds of demand response systems, as they're called. You need to have thousands or hundreds of thousands of electric vehicle batteries that are synchronously contributing back to the grid. And again, that is also where an energy management system helps in coordinating all of them together.
Yeah, this also, like, we discussed this in one of our episodes, that there's more kind of if every household is independent power also provider for the grid, it is a huge challenge because it's more unpredictable. So yeah, like you said, it needs that it would be much bigger virtual power plant, basically, which can be centrally controlled.
Precisely.
Going back to gridX, who are your customers? I mean, we heard already that you are in EV charging, and you are also bringing a management system to homeowners. But can you expand more about your customers?
Sure. In a very broad scope, we are at our heart a B2B company, which means we sell our products to a wide variety of energy suppliers. People who or companies who are utilities themselves, or companies who are large-scale suppliers of decentralized energy systems, for example, or companies who are charge point operators who are basically then installing these charging stations or charging stations all across Europe. So all of these providers have a direct touch point with the end user, which is then a homeowner, right? And all of them want only one thing for their homeowners, basically then that is maximum benefit in terms of costs and maximum benefits in terms of emissions, that is carbon dioxide reduced per kilowatt hour of electricity. And so what we do is then we actively participate with all of our customers in trying to understand what is the need of the market, the home energy market at this particular point of time. And then based on these needs, we then, of course, come up with our own long-term roadmap as to features and solutions that we want to offer as part of our gridX product, which is then this energy management platform called Xenon, where then this is directly then sold to our customers, and then who then bring it to the end user's home in the form of a smart IoT device that then talks to all of your assets and then coordinates them using energy management logic.
Okay, thanks for the explanation. One more question from me. As an energy enthusiast, what are the major trends that you are excited about, or what are the emerging technology that you are looking forward to?
Oh, great question. I think, like I mentioned earlier, one of the assets of the year or assets of the decade itself is the heat pump, purely because it's such a complex asset, which has the potential to contribute so much to reducing the emissions of our buildings. This is talking to a heat pump or communicating or optimizing a heat pump is one of the most fascinating topics that we have had the honor of working on in gridX, and we're looking forward to in the upcoming years as more and more regulations kick in, more and more people are incentivized to buy more heat pumps. install more heat pumps. Another major trend that is currently happening is as mentioned by Kari, this whole dynamic tariff effect, where countries are bringing in so much renewable generation on the utility scale that they have to then adjust the price as to when more solar is being generated, then incentivize the people to buy more by reducing the price of electricity. So having a smart system that then consumes more with greener electricity is also a major trend that we're looking to catch up with. And also another trend that I've loved reading about, especially from the EV context, that could be really useful for your listeners, is this concept of fleet charging. Which is basically then having, saying that, hey, instead of having focusing on every individual homeowner, we try to focus on the companies who have fleets of cars, like, like the Ubers or the Amazons, who then want to migrate en masse towards electric vehicles. And if they do have, for example, 1,000 electric vehicles that are on the road every day and have to charge every night in these parking lots, how do you coordinate this charging? So that is another trend that is probably a really low-hanging fruit, because it's much more easier to sell 1,000 EVs or 1,000 electric vans to one Amazon as opposed to 1,000 different homeowners. And like I mentioned, I think one trend that I'm really looking forward to, or one change that I'm really looking forward to, is how companies will adapt when they realize that they cannot go to China for everything. How are we going to localize the production of electric vehicles? How are we going to localize the production of batteries, heat pumps? How do we make use of materials that are found in abundance in our geography as opposed to importing them? How do we shift the technologies over from China over to the Europe or over to the US? How do we then develop a workforce that are then proficient in working with these technologies? And then how do we localize everything so that basically we reduce the costs of the technology themselves? I think these are the upcoming trends that, and of course, challenges, like you mentioned, that we should be looking forward to. Or I am looking forward to it, definitely.
Yeah, this discussion is in the very core of the kind of what is happening now. And you guys obviously have a very much currently opportunities where you can utilize your product, and it will be growing exponentially, not only in Europe, but all over the world. Europe probably is in ahead, this kind of green energy and alternative power sources and so on. But definitely It's going to be growing in elsewhere also.
You're right. I think in terms of EV uptake, I think the EU is second only to China. But I think in terms of uptake of other technologies, I think the US, especially with the IRA that was released last year, I think has completely turned the game up on its head with the massive push towards localizing manufacturing, right? And providing these incentive tax credits for localizing manufacturing and supply chains. Because I think when you look at the numbers, it is so staggering, how much of the technology is localized to China or exported to China at the time being. 25 to 50% of battery mining, of mineral mining, 50 to 75% of processing of the materials, 75 to 80% of the battery cell manufacturing, and I think overall 40 to 50% of global EV production is happening in one country right now. And just diversifying from that would bring down, hopefully in the long run. Of course, in the short term, you might expect price escalations, but in the long term, bring down prices so much that people are just more and more incentivized to go out there and try these electric technologies out. Try out a heat pump, try out an electric vehicle, and see the change it brings to themselves.
Yeah, I think the last winter in Europe raised a lot of interest of the homeowners to upgrade their, let's say, the heat pumps and heating systems to more modern and more efficient ones when the energy prices spiked for a moment.
Absolutely. I think especially felt in the heating systems, right? Because Europe is dependent heavily on gas heating. I think, that is close to, 25 to 30% of European gas came from Russia. which was then suddenly over a period of 6 to 12 months just completely brought down to zero, which then meant you had to have an alternative. Of course, Europe looked to other countries for providing these buffers of gas, especially the US with its LNG. But that just sort of accelerated a lot of things simultaneously, including the push towards heat pumps, I think, which is why, as a part of the massive incentives that are coming out in Germany, the heat pumps and the EVs are especially focused on, because I think these two devices especially reduce the dependency on natural gas and the dependency on fuels in general. So that is, I think, why last winter, I think, was also relatively stable in the sense that it wasn't such a harsh winter, but we cannot hope for that luck every year. So, which is why the push towards decentralized, green, alternative electrical assets is only going to get more and more intensive.
Yeah, huge market potential there. And yeah, thank you for joining us today, Kedar.
Thank you so much for having me here, Rika Kari. Great to share my insights.
A special offer for our listeners. We are giving you full access to statistics for 30 days by registering at statson.com with the code STATSON, spelled in uppercase STATZON. Thanks for listening to our podcast. Visit our website and get our Tech 360 newsletters. If you enjoyed this podcast, subscribe, recommend the podcast to your colleagues, friends, and family, and follow us on social media.